What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I have some things I want to talk about today, including some updates, to the storyline about the collective bargaining agreement, how that's gone to this point. And there's also, with that collective bargaining agreement, there's two things. One, that needs to be agreed upon, right? There definitely has to be some sort of agreement between the NFLPA and the NFL before next year. Otherwise, there could be a lockout and a strike by the players. So that's one aspect. Obviously, that's not until the future. I mean, if they end up agreeing on this CBA, which is not totally agreed upon at this point, it's kind of, sort of, maybe. We'll still wait and see. But if they do agree upon it, then we can expect there will not be a lockout or a strike next season. But if they are unable to come to an agreement, then that would, obviously make that more likely. Now, the more relevant part as of right now about this storyline, though, happens to be about the structure of the potential season coming up, because they might be redoing the playoff structure, etc., etc. So let's get right into it. The other thing, though, that I'm going to also talk about in this video is some updates to the coaching staff. They have officially announced some of the hires, and there was an addition to that list that I have yet to mention in any of my videos, so we'll get to that as well. So let's start with the potential changes. I'm going to read through a couple articles. I'm going to try and get through them as fast as possible, but I do want to read them in their entirety because they do give a lot of good information and also potential, outcomes of this. So let's start with... Let's start with this article from ESPN that actually talks about what has, happened to this point. So, sources: CBA vote will go to full NFLPA membership. A vote on the proposed collective bargaining agreement will go to the full membership of the NFL Players Association, even if player reps vote not to recommend approval, sources told ESPN's Dan Graziano on Friday. A simple majority would be required to approve it. Anyone who paid NFLPA dues during the 2019-2020 league year is eligible to vote, which is an estimated 2,100 players. The NFLPA's Executive Council voted 6-5 not to recommend the proposal, as first reported by the NFL Network and confirmed by ESPN. But sources said the originally scheduled conference call with the player reps was proceeding as scheduled at 1 p.m. on Friday, and that it remained possible that a body of 32 players still could vote to recommend the deal to the full membership. Sources told Graziano that there has been a discussion among union leaders and union lawyers on this point for several days, and they settled on having a full vote regardless of the recommendation of player reps. On Thursday, owners approved the CBA with more than the required 3/4 of the owners voting to ratify. So let's pause real quick. So as we know, some of the key points to this, which we'll actually touch on in a minute, are that there's going to be potentially 7 teams from each conference, so 14 teams altogether that make it into the playoffs. They're also talking about a 17-game schedule, etc., etc., etc. We'll get into more of those details in a second, but that's the basis of what's going on here. Now, the owners on Thursday approved it, right? So the owners of these teams say yes. Now, let's keep in mind that these owners, the owners of all these teams, are massively wealthy and only really give a shit about their bottom line. Okay? They approved it. Now, the players' reps, the executive council of the players' reps, decided to oppose this 6-5. Now, to be fair, that's a slim majority, right? It's barely a majority. They have 11 people, obviously, so that way they don't have any kind of tie. If it was 10, you could get ties, and then you would need some tiebreakers. So 11, obviously, it makes sense. 6-5, so it was a slim majority. So half of the players' reps did vote in favor of it. Now, when it comes to unions, I mean, obviously unions are great in a lot of ways. That's what the NFLPA is. It's the players' union, right? They're great in a lot of ways, but in the capitalist society that we live in, oftentimes individuals within the union, not necessarily the union as a whole, and oftentimes the perspective of the union members can often be different from the perspective of the union leadership. Now, I don't know, to be fair and to be honest, but there is, potential that some of those people who voted yes to recommend it could be in line with the agenda of the NFL owners. Now, but also to be fair, some of the owners, I don't know who specifically, but some of the owners did vote against the proposal. However, they needed 3/4 to approve it to begin with, and they got that well within, or pretty easily, I guess, right? According to this. So they got, they needed 3/4, but they got, way more than that apparently, or well above that to be able to make sure that they got it. So probably the vast majority, if there were any dissension among owners, and if anybody has this information, I haven't seen it, be sure to let me know. I'd be interested, but not very many of the owners. So very few of the owners voted against it. About half of the player reps from the executive council, right, voted in favor. Half of them voted against it. The majority ended up voting against it. So so it is still on hold for now. That's why it's going to end, part of why it's going to end up going to the full NFLPA, whatever, everybody. So all of those players, the 2,100 players, etc., and they're all going to get to vote. But we do have some big name players later on in this that chimed in. So we'll get to look at a little bit of anecdotal evidence to see how we think that this might end up going. Now, my guess is that the players are not actually going to be happy with this. Now, there's some good things, certainly some good things in here. Like, for example, let's see. According to an NFLPA memo released Thursday, here are some of the proposal's key terms that player reps in the union's executive council will weigh when they meet. The elimination of any game suspension strictly for positive marijuana tests, which I think is great, but that should be, obviously it should be part of the CBA, but I think it should be a little bit separate from the structure of the season. Because they should just do that anyway. Our country obviously needs to hurry up and just legalize marijuana, and when Bernie Sanders is president, that will happen. But until then, they should, but, will they? Who knows? Obviously, that would be a positive step in the right direction, and also a reduction in the number of players subjected to testing for marijuana. So that's great. But the reason why I have an issue with it is because those are great things to make progress on, but that's also stuff that baits some of these, that could bait some of these players, or these NFLPA reps into voting for it, even though the overall proposal could be to the detriment of the players, right? So, who knows? I'm not an expert on this. I don't have enough information to say one way or the other, and it's still super new in the conversation of it all, so I don't know personally, but who knows? It is certainly, again, in this capitalist world that we live in, with how much the NFL and the owners only really give a shit about, their money, and they prove it time and time and time again, it certainly wouldn't surprise me that the owners have overwhelmingly approved a proposal that benefits them and their bottom line, but would actually, in fact, give almost nothing to the players, or give them a couple crumbs, like saying, you know what, we're gonna, even though, marijuana use is widely accepted in this country, it really should be legalized on the federal level, and we really should stop pestering you guys with it, and in fact allow you to use it, because it's a lot better than all of the prescriptions that we give you in so many different ways. But you know what? The pharmaceutical industry, they love those prescription drugs and making money on it any way they can. And you know what? We love our bottom line in various different ways. They advertise on our networks and during our games games and stuff like that, etc., etc. So there's all kinds of ways in which they are tied to these various different industries, etc., etc., and which would make, you know, it. And anyway, so I think you guys get the point. I don't know, again, to be completely fair, because I don't know all the specific details, etc., etc., but my guess is, just how I know how the world works, etc., etc., my guess is that this is a proposal that overwhelmingly benefits the owners and their bottom line, and only gives minor marginal concessions to the players, like, hey, we're gonna stop pestering you for something that we shouldn't be pestering you for anyway, and in fact we should very much be promoting to you, as opposed to the, you know, super lucrative but harmful, you know. Now obviously prescription drugs do have their use, but in my opinion, they should only be used for extreme cases, and not like fucking candy. They shouldn't be eaten like candy, like the vast majority of people who are on prescription drugs are told and forced to eat them, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, let's continue on. Gambling definitions that ensure players receive a portion of gambling revenue brought in by the league. Okay, but even in this, gambling definitions is in quotes. So look, I mean, to me, all of this stuff is very minor. I mean, obviously we know part of the main structure of this is a 17-game season, as well as, you know, changes to the playoffs. Alterations to training camp, including the introduction to a 5-day acclimation period, a limit of 16 days in pads, and a limit of 4 joint practices, and a 3 preseason games scenario. So there also would be limiting the preseason to 3 games as opposed to 4. Now, like I said, a lot of these little things I actually like, and I think are good progress to actually bettering the game, the quality of the game, as well as helping to, you know, limit and lessen injuries. However, again, and to be fair, I don't know. We'll have to, you know, wait and see how it plays out. We'll have to see what the players have to say about it. And, you know, the reps and the lawyers, etc., etc., and how it all plays out. But again, I don't put it past the people in power to benefit themselves to the detriment of the people, you know, on the other side of the equation. Sources also told ESPN's Adam Schefter that the proposal includes a game day roster increase from 46 players to 48, with overall rosters going from 53 to 55. So that's interesting. Teams would also be allowed to bring back 3 players from injured reserve each season, sources said, and practice squads would go from 10 players last season to 12 in 2020 and 14 in 2022. Also interesting, although I'm a person who is not a fan of free agency, so, you know, to me, I don't know. I don't know how that would work. Maybe I don't know, because I don't like how everything is just centered around money, right? And like, I mean, I definitely think the players need to be adequately paid for their services and for what they do, etc. But, you know, I hate free agency. It's super cutthroat. It drives up prices both for players and teams, and I think it's been overwhelmingly more of a disaster. There's no kind of loyalty between players and teams anymore. It's just garbage, and I think it needs to go away. So it'll be interesting to see how the increase in that affects those kinds of things, right? With more roster spots available, maybe, I don't know, right? Supply and demand, how does that work? You know, in this regard, there's a lot that goes into it, so there's still a lot that needs to be sussed out. Alright, so one of the NFL's best players, Houston Texans defensive end J.J. Watt, took to social media Thursday night to voice his disapproval for the proposal. Sources previously told ESPN that the proposed CBA would allow the league to expand the regular season from 16 games to 17 at some point in the next 4 years, although no sooner than 2021, so it wouldn't happen this year, potentially next year, in exchange for financial and other concessions the players have sought in negotiations. So, I mean, see, that's the thing. Like, these players have already apparently been trying to get certain concessions in those regards, and the NFL has been unwilling to give it to them, and they're like, you know what? We have this way in which we can, because obviously they want the 17 game, you know, more teams in the playoffs, because, you know, somehow that's going to affect their bottom line for the better, right? So obviously, I mean, it's inconceivable that the owners are agreeing to something that doesn't help their bottom line. So they're like, you know what? We figured out a way that we can make even more money, and we'll skim you off just a tiny bit off the top, and we'll give you the concessions that you've been asking for God knows how long now, but you got to give us a ton more. That's going to rake in millions upon millions, if not more billions, for us already fabulously wealthy owners. Okay, I guess. One concession is that the preseason would be shortened, sources said, which would be cool, you know, because I think overall the preseason is pretty, I don't think it's useless, but I do think it is too long. So that, you know, honestly, I wouldn't even hate dropping it maybe to 2 games, but let's see how 3 games plays out if that's what ends up happening. I think it could be a potential step in the right direction, but again, these concessions are minor compared to, I mean, because look, at the end of the day, I mean, if they really did give a shit, they would completely overhaul the entire fucking rule book. They would get rid of stupid rules that don't need to be in there. They would clean up a lot of the language, etc., etc. You know, they wouldn't, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, they would get rid of free agency. I think that would help a lot in a lot of ways. They would give, you know, they would institute guaranteed contracts, blah, 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 blah. There's so many different things that they could do that they just absolutely refuse to do. Right? Not to mention their terrible history of hiding CTE, blah, 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 blah. They don't have a good track record. In addition, sources says that starting in 2020, the playoff field would be expanded to 7 teams from each conference, and only 1 team from each conference would receive a first-round bye, as opposed to 2 that currently do. The league's desire to expand the regular season has been met with harsh opposition from many players who view an expanded season as an unnecessary increase in the risk to players' health and safety. Right? So that's the thing. They say, oh, you know, we'll reduce the preseason for that reason, but we're going to expand the regular season when it's even more brutal, and etc., blah, blah, blah. Because to them, it's wonderful. They don't care about how the players get hurt, right? As long as there's enough stars on the field that it's exciting and that they can fucking generate tons and tons of revenue. I mean, it's just, again, I'm trying to be fair because I don't know all the specific details, but the more I learn about it, the more one-sided it definitely seems. And because it does seem like, I mean, I didn't see JJ Watt's specific quotes, but he's, you know, speaking out against it. Tons of players are. They did disapprove it overall from the executive standpoint in the NFLPA. So, I mean, it does look like there is a break there and a rift there, but that is why there are potential implications for the 2021 season as far as there being a lockout, right? So some of these effects, if they were to approve it, some of these effects wouldn't go into place until the 2021 season, but there might not even be a 2021 season at all if they are unable to agree on something, and if the players do decide to say, which could be devastating to the NFL, especially with the way the XFL is actually picking up steam. We'll see how that all plays out. But again, that's part of the reason why I've said that this whole, you know, philosophy of the Dolphins is a complete disaster, because there are so many things that could go wrong with it, including this. All right, let's see. Let's continue. But union leaders have touted to players the benefits of the proposed new deal, which includes a higher percentage of league revenue going to players. Okay, pause real quick on that. So again, and to be fair, I don't know, but it's not unheard of for, you know, leadership in unions to side with corporations and to help, you know, convince the fucking people that they represent that they need to do things that are actually against their best interest and that actually benefit the corporations. I don't know, to be fair, but it's not unreasonable. And, you know, it's certainly a possibility that could be the case. Again, don't know, you know, we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out, but it is possible. And when they say, you know, higher percentage of league revenue going to players, well, what is that? I mean, if it's like, I don't know what it is now, but let's say it's like 2%. Well, if it ends up being 2.5%, Okay, who the fuck cares? That's nothing compared to their actual contracts and how much they generally make. And again, there's more to it than just the fucking money, etc., etc. And if it's just a marginal increase, then it's just breadcrumbs, right? So we'll have to see how that goes. Improvements in the drug policy and discipline policy. Okay, it's garbage. It's been garbage for a long time. They refuse to do anything about it. And again, they're like lauding it over them like, hey, we shouldn't be fucking you guys over for marijuana to begin with, and in fact should be promoting that over a lot of these super harmful prescription drugs. But you know what? We'll think about maybe doing it now. But you got to give us a ton more where we make billions upon billions more. Like, it's just not fair, right? It's not an even playing field because the players have almost no power, you know, except, anyway. So, improvement, let's see, higher minimum salaries. Okay, we'll have to see the specifics of that. Higher per team spending floors and relaxed off-season work rules. Okay. So, in other words, now, again, and maybe I'm wrong about higher per team spending floors. So, what does that mean? Just increase to the cap? Like, I mean, I don't know, but that's what it sounds like to me. I mean, that shit goes up every year anyway, right? I mean, that's what it sounds like because a higher per team spending floor. So, that means the base amount. So to me that sounds like the cap, right? You have a cap on how much teams can spend. I think it's like 170 million or some shit right now per year, right? But it tends to go up every single season by a nice little chunk anyway. But that's where the floor is, right? That's every team's floor. How much can you spend on your roster? But also, let's note that they're also talking about increasing the number of practice squad players from 10 to 14 eventually. The active roster from 40, what is it, 46 to 48, and then the overall roster 53 to 55. So you're also going to have more players that you need to play. So that might even just get completely negated, right? And relaxed off-season work rules. What the fuck does that even mean? I don't even know. Which were noted in the above mentioned NFLPA memo. Oh, okay. So the alterations to training camp and stuff. I mean, all of it seems very marginal and breadcrumbs at best from what I've got so far. But let's take a look at this other article real quick from Bleacher Report that gives a little bit more detail. Potential upside and downside of 14-team NFL playoff. Rule changes are nothing new to the National Football League. In recent years, we've seen changes to the language defining what a catch is, which, of course, the catch rule is still garbage. The pass interference rule is still garbage. We've seen the league experiment with the challenging of pass interference. We've seen changes to both the kickoff and overtime. And overwhelmingly, they seem to end up destroying the game with the rules that they implement more than they do help it, but it's always to their bottom line. Changes to the fundamental structure of the NFL season, those are much less familiar, but they do occur. Flexible scheduling was added in 2006. Since 2010, the final week of the season has only involved divisional matchups. Changes to the NFL playoff system are even more foreign. The league has consisted of 2 conferences and 8 divisions since 2002. The playoffs have had 12 participants since 1990. Now the postseason can see a dramatic shift beginning in 2020 as the league has proposed a new 14-team playoff format. The proposal, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter, one part of the new CBA between the league and the NFL Players Association is a 14-team postseason format. Under the proposed format, each conference will send 3 wild card teams along with the 4 division winners. Only the top seed in each conference will receive a first round bye. Players on a playoff bye will also receive a postseason game check, which they currently do not. Okay, but see, and that's the thing. God, I hate, right? So what is their main selling point to the players? We're going to give you more money. The most superficial shit, right? Which I'm sure a lot of them like, but they already do make a lot of money. Even like practice squad guys make way more than the average American does, right? Anyway, so they still make pretty damn good money, even as like a practice squad player. But obviously it goes up into the millions upon millions. And then like, what is the rest of that? Some stupid, some minor lax rules in the off season. We're going to stop pestering you maybe about marijuana, even though we should have done that long time ago. And we're going to drop one preseason game, but add one regular season game. We're going to make some changes to the amount of people that you can have on the roster. Like, it doesn't compare. It doesn't compare to the massive benefit that the owners and the NFL get at the end of the day, right? It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. It's scraps. Per Schefter, the players are on board with an expanded playoff system. Well, from the other article we just went through, that's not necessarily the case, but let's see what goes on here. That's been agreed to for a long time, one source familiar with the CBA talk said per Schefter. There wasn't a lot of disagreement to that issue. Okay, well, that seems to be an anonymous source. We don't know who said that, but apparently J.J. Watt specifically is opposed to it, even though we didn't get his actual quotes. They didn't put it in that article, but tons of players have opposed it as well. And again, they did vote it down 6-5 in the executives of the NFLPA. So apparently there is some significant disagreement there. So I don't know exactly how true that is. And again, that's just an anonymous source, so we don't even know who it came from. It could be nobody, right? It could just be some, one of the low-level players that doesn't even really know anything. Low-level meaning like, he's not like a star player making millions, just a back-end roster kind of guy or a practice squad guy, but paid his dues into the NFLPA, so, has an opinion, right? Where there could be an issue is the league's desire for a 17-game regular season schedule. NFL owners have already approved the terms of the CBA proposal. Now, to be fair though, it does seem to me that most of the disapproval from the players seems to be about the regular season, not necessarily the playoffs. The players and the representatives are expected to consider the proposal via conference call on Friday, according to NFL Network's Tom Pelissero. While the 17-game season could be a sticking point, it certainly feels like the 14-team playoff is on the horizon. Here, we'll examine some of the pros and cons of the potential new postseason format. Pro, more teams equals better postseason chances. Having close to 50% of each conference's teams in the postseason means that teams have a better chance of getting in. That might not mean much to the New England Patriots of the world, but for teams like, say, the Cleveland Browns and Cincinnati Bengals, the additional slot could be huge. Yes, but it also does mean less. If there are more tickets, then it's less prestigious or whatever, right? So there is that counterbalance. The Browns for example, it would give the Dolphins a better chance too. But if we made the very last wild card spot somehow, we could be a sub 500 team, and that opens up the door a lot more to have sub 500 teams make it into the playoffs. We don't see that very often, or teams that are even just 500 or barely over 500. We see that a little bit now. We'll see it a lot more in that case as well. So it becomes less of a big deal, right? So the Dolphins, could end up squeaking in the next few years in that, but that wouldn't really say as much as if they would have done it with two less teams actually being able to make it, right? So we'll see. The Browns haven't been to the playoffs since the 2002 season. Real quick, just another side note. Again, that's the team that everybody looks at to say, oh, that's the example of tanking, but they haven't been any kind of a success to this point, let alone maintain sustainable success. And then, of course, everybody now is like, oh, the Dolphins didn't tank. No, that's not true, right? And people are like, oh, they won 5 games. It's irrelevant. People are like, oh, they didn't get the number 1 pick. Also irrelevant. You don't get every team that gets the number 1 pick every year didn't tank. That's ridiculous. That would mean that every year there's at least one team that tanked, and it's automatically the team that got the number 1 pick. That's not what makes a tank. That's not what defines a team tanking. No, what defines a team tanking is that they strip their roster, purge it of talent, leadership, proven production, experience, etc. They accumulate draft capital and cap space, and then they do a complete from the ground up rebuild, etc. That is what a tank is. That is exactly what they did. Part of that is to simultaneously also get as high a draft pick as you possibly can. It's not the ultimate goal is the number one pick, but that doesn't mean that you have to get the number one pick for it to constitute a tank. That is absurd. Absolutely absurd. And the fact that they won 5 games is also irrelevant. If they would have won 10 games, also irrelevant. The difference there would be is that would be a miraculous turnaround after having purged the team, and you could legitimately give, Brian Flores consideration for Coach of the Year and Chris Greer GM of the Year after having taken a team that didn't need to be reset to that level to begin with, completely strip it down to not even the studs, not even a foundation, and then, win that many games. Okay, that would be something, but it would still be irrelevant to the fact that they initiated a tanking philosophy. They still would have done that. It still would be a fact. Those things, I suppose, technically could simultaneously exist, although I find it almost inconceivable that a team that institutes a philosophy of tanking could win 10 games that season. But I suppose theoretically it's possible. But regardless, irrelevant. Anyway, the Browns, not a good example because they have not even achieved success, let alone maintained it. And anyway, so the Bengals have not notched a playoff win since the 1988 season. Under the proposed new format, both of these streaks could end sooner. But again, it means so much less. An expanded postseason means that fan bases that are regularly disappointed will have a better chance of justifying their "this is our year" feeling. But again, dude, it cheapens it so much. It cheapens it so much. And for a team like the Bengals, they haven't won a postseason game since 1988. So do fans really want to say then, oh yeah, we snuck in with the as the 14th team in the playoffs, the 7th team in our conference. We were the last team to make it in. We got in there with like a 7-9 record, and then we lose in the first fucking round because our team's not actually that good. Really? Like, is that really what fans want to be able to look at and be like, yeah, we finally made it to the playoffs? I know it's great to be able to say that, but like, I mean, it's just mind-blowing because it just doesn't mean anything. Oh yeah, we finally made it there even though we're not very good after they decided to expand the number of teams that can make it in. Like, really? That's how you want to make it into the playoffs? No, I want to make it into the playoffs because we win our division, or because, we competed for a wild card spot, but we did it amongst good teams and did it with like a 10-6 record or an 11-5 record or whatever, right? That's how I want to get into the playoffs, not because, we're 7-9 and they happen to expand it to 14 teams overall, so we get to squeak in with a shitty record and a not so good team and are almost guaranteed to lose early on in the playoffs because we just can't compete, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. Anyway, so again, I mean, that's a pro, right? That's one of their pros. I actually think that's probably overall leaning a little bit more to the cons. But sure, just on its face, like when you get into the nuance of it, it's more of a con to me than it is a pro. But on its face, you just say, oh, there's a better chance for the playoffs. But why is that? It's not because your team actually improved or your team is better or deserves it necessarily. It's because the NFL decided that they want more more teams in the playoffs because they feel like that's going to increase their bottom line. It's ridiculous. Anyway, pro, it potentially lessens the impact of injuries. Well, let's see how. Having better odds is great for downtrodden franchises, but it means little for regular contenders, right? Well, not exactly. A better chance of reaching the postseason will also benefit quality teams that experience significant injuries. This past season, for example, the Pittsburgh Steelers played 14 games without starting quarterback Ben Roethlisberger. They finished the season with a championship caliber defense, in large part, mostly notable because of Minkah Fitzpatrick. Let's not forget about that, because the Dolphins are fucking morons for everything that they did to force him into a situation where he felt like he needed to get the fuck out of there, and then prove that if you just use me appropriately and don't institute a failing philosophy of tanking, well, I'm gonna ball the fuck out. Anyway, I'm not gonna let that go in case you guys hadn't noticed. Let's see. One ranked 5th in both scoring and yardage, but with a mere 8-8 record and out of the playoffs. Under the revamped format, however, the Steelers wouldn't have been punished quite so severely for having one key injury. Okay, hold on a second, though. And as much as I would have loved to see the Steelers in the playoffs, I wouldn't want to see it like that. Like, are you kidding me? They shouldn't have made the playoffs because they weren't good enough overall throughout the season. Yes, it was because of injuries, but that's part of the game, dude. And if you really give a shit about injuries, do things about the rule book. Do things that actually stop fucking forcing players to take prescription drugs and allow them to use marijuana. There are tons of things that they could do. They could put tons of research into fucking, like, Luke Kuechly just retired, if I'm not mistaken. But he has, I don't know exactly what it is, but he has something that he wears around his neck to help with, like, you know, regulation of blood flow or something like that, to help lessen potential concussions and brain damage, right? There's so many things that they could do, but this is their answer. We're gonna say that expanding the playoffs and the regular season is going to lessen injuries because, like, they're not even making a case for how it lessens injuries. All they're saying is that a team that gets injured could still potentially make it in. What? Again, not even a pro. So much, way more of a con. I mean, like, and for Steelers fans out there, is that how you would have wanted to get into the playoffs this season? Like, is just making it to the playoffs, because they would have been the last seed. They would have been the last fucking team to make it in. So is that based off of how it played out? So is that really how you guys as Steelers fans would have wanted to make it in? I mean, it's absurd. Anyway, Pittsburgh would have gotten in as the 7th seed. Really? So just being able to say you make it to the playoffs, even though there's a distinct possibility that you would have gotten beat early on, if not necessarily in the first game. Like, I mean, because they wouldn't have been able to beat the Ravens or the Chiefs or the Titans, I think, would have beat them. Like, there's tons of teams that would have... I mean... It's ridiculous. And that doesn't come with a championship for your division. Right? You make it to the playoffs, but it was the 3rd wild card spot. Like, really? I mean, come on. The Steelers would have played the number 2 seed Kansas City. They would have played Kansas City in the 1st round, the number 2 seed. Are you serious? No, it wouldn't have been worth it at all. And the classic offense versus defense matchup would have been a fun way to kick off the playoffs. Really? So that's... But... do people not understand how that's dripping with all we give a shit about is our fucking bottom line? Let's read that again. And the classic offense versus defense matchup would have been a fun way to kick off the playoffs. Even though, first of all, there's absolutely no guarantee that the Steelers defense would have been able to, as amazing as they are with TJ Watt and Devin Bush and Minkah, etc., that they would have been able to stop the overpowered Chiefs offense. But also, the Chiefs have a pretty solid defense too. And with the way that the Steelers offense played throughout the season, it could have easily been a blowout. Like, what the fuck are they talking about? Clearly, that's nothing more than just some bullshit selling point to convince people that it's a good thing, even though the only purpose really is just to profit the fucking NFL and the owners. Okay, but those are their 2 pros. To me, sound like more like cons, if I'm being honest, than pros. But okay, now let's get into what they have to say about cons. It decreases the value of the number 2 seed. One of the biggest regular season goals for any team is earning a first round playoff bye. So this absolutely is true, though. It would lessen that. but it lessens the entire value of the playoffs overall, which is part of, you know, my argument and why those pros are actually more cons. An extra week, and also why it's counterproductive to their point of, even though they didn't know anything that would prove to lessen it, but they're like, oh, there's going to be less injuries. Well, how? You haven't provided any information or data to suggest that that would be the case. And in fact, the players have voiced a lot of concerns because they feel like it would actually increase their chances for injury. But then you also take away the playoff bye. Now you have more teams in the playoffs, and you take the playoff bye away from two of the teams overall in the playoffs, so they don't get that week of rest. So now they actually have to play. I mean, that's asking. More teams in the postseason increases chance for overall injuries, and taking away the bye from those teams increases the chance for overall injuries. Okay. I know we don't live in a world where reality matters or facts or data matters. Okay, whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous. Let's see. An extra week at this time of the season is crucial, Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers said this past season via the team's official website. With just one team in each conference earning a bye, there could be teams that fall out of the first round bye mix early. Getting the number 2 seed also loses some significance. Last year, the Baltimore Ravens locked up the AFC's number 1 seed in week 16. Under the proposed new format, playoff-bound AFC teams would have had little to play for in the season finale. This might have significantly hurt the Chiefs, who snagged the second bye in week 17 and went on to win the Super Bowl. I mean, to me, it just sounds like far more of a mess at this point than and only it seems to be just, you know, how can the NFL and the owners make more money? All right, let's go on to their next pro. Here's another pro. More interesting late season games. Okay, hold on. I got to stop on the headline right there. They literally just said in their con, it decreases the value of the number 2 seed. And part of their reasoning is that there might have, let's see, where is it? Under the proposed new format, playoff-bound AFC teams would have had little to play for in the season finale. That's far more likely to happen. Now, you could also argue that it's also, you know, higher chances that more teams will have something to play for because there's additional spots. But, and that is true, but it also takes away that part of it, and at least in part gets negated by the fact that, you know, the number 2 seed is not worth it so much anymore. And, you know, like the Steelers probably would have got trounced against the Chiefs. It wouldn't have been some, you know, legendary matchup against offense and defense. Not likely, maybe, but not likely, especially since that would have been a home game for the Chiefs. The Steelers would have had to go to KC. Okay, but then their next pro is more interesting late season games, even though they've just admit in the previous section, in their con section, one of their con sections, that teams could have less to fight for at the end of the season. Okay, well, let's see what they have to say. An expanded playoff field will mean that bubble teams won't get eliminated from contention quite as early. Last season, for example, 9 AFC teams were either in the postseason or still alive entering week 16. So again, that is true, but it means far less when there's more tickets. And again, for a team like Steelers, it wouldn't have been worth it. It wouldn't have been worth it at all, in my opinion. 8 teams in the NFC were in the same position. Expanding that number to 10 or 11 teams in each conference would have a major impact. It would the only impact more teams get in. It means so much less. And the overall implications of this could actually be overall detrimental to the players, etc., etc. So, I mean, of the 16 games played in week 16, 11 had playoff implications. With another wildcard team in each conference, nearly every single contest might carry playoff relevance. This would mean that virtually every game would carry weight. I mean, a little bit, yes, because there'd be more spots. But again, overall, anyway, con, watering down the playoff field. Again, I mean, this is part of what I'm saying, right? and why overwhelmingly it seems like the cons way outweigh the pros, especially since some of those pros actually sound more like cons. An expanded field could weaken the strength of some postseason matchups. Would fans be excited about watching the 13-3 Los Angeles Rams host the 8-7-1 Minnesota Vikings in the opening round? Okay, hold on a second. First of all, I actually think that that would have been a far better matchup overall than the 8-8 fucking Steelers against the goddamn whatever Kansas City Chiefs in KC. I think, okay, anyway, that's the matchup fans would have gotten in 2018 under the proposed new format. They also would have gotten the fucking previously touted Steelers-Chiefs game, and the Steelers potentially could have gotten their asses handed to them because they have almost no offense, especially because AB wasn't there, Le'Veon Bell wasn't there, Roethlisberger went down, James Conner was injured. I mean, they were just decimated, not just to Roethlisberger, and their defense can't win the whole fucking thing for them. Especially against the fucking high-powered Chiefs offense with Patrick Mahomes that's guaranteed to do something. It doesn't make any fucking sense. While there are exceptions, the Tennessee Titans made it to the AFC Championship game this past season. Bottom seeds are already extreme long shots. I mean, they continue to prove my point for me. Only 2 6 seeds have ever won the Super Bowl in the 30 years of the 12-team playoff. Again, it makes it so much less worth it. Or, anyway, it could be that long before a 7th seed even wins a title. This could even be problematic for the NFL if it has an overlap in game scheduling for Wild Card Weekend. Though, there would presumably be 3 games on Saturday and 3 on Sunday with 3 different time slots. If 2 games are on simultaneously, the one involving the 7th seed could be an afterthought. No, they'll make sure to find a way to fucking suck as much airtime and profit out as they possibly can. But anyway, this overwhelmingly, to me, the more I learn about it and get through it, is it's not good. But we'll see. We'll have to wait and see how it goes and what the players have to say at the end of the day. Pro/con. An entire division can enter the playoffs. Under the proposed new format, an entire division could get into the postseason at the same time. It would be unlikely. The same division has sent 3 teams to the playoffs 7 times since the 2002 realignment, but not impossible. In 2017, for example, the New Orleans Saints, Carolina Panthers, and Atlanta Falcons all made the playoffs. Had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers finished 9-7 with the 7th seed, the entire NFC South would have gotten in. Unlikely? Yes. The Buccaneers went 1-5 in the division, meaning they would have had to go 8-2 outside it. Again, not impossible. Depending on how you view the playoff field, this could be seen as a pro or a con. Again, to me, more of a con. Because then that also lessens the worth and value of the division championship. Right? I mean, it's already a possibility that 3 teams within a division, and we see 2 teams actually from single divisions make it a lot, right? The Bills and Patriots this year, the Tennessee Titans and the Houston Texans this year, right? So that happens a lot. Sometimes 3, but then, what if an entire division? Then that means that, the division championship is far less valuable, right? So to me, it's a con. For those who simply want to see the best teams play in the postseason, it would be pretty nifty for an entire elite division to be represented. Yeah, but how does that, because again, he's saying that if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in that scenario got to 9-7, that's barely a winning team. They were 1-5 in their division. Terrible divisional record. Right? They would have had to go 8-2 outside their division, which they didn't. Right? So, what do you mean? So, in that example, how is a 9-7 team that went 1-5 within their division, how is that an elite team in an elite division? It's not. It's not. What do you mean? Like, that's craziness. It would be pretty nifty for an entire elite division to be represented. The only way that would be the case is if every team in the division won 10 plus games. But even in that case, again, it lessens the value of the divisional championship, because if every team in the division is a 10 plus winner and then all subsequently makes it into the playoffs because the field is expanded, including a couple of those being wild cards, like it's dramatically saps the value of it. So again, to me, overwhelmingly, this whole thing seems to be more of a detriment. Again, we have to wait until we get further details, see how it all plays out. And, you know, hear what the players actually have to say, and then see if it actually even gets agreed upon, right? And then if it doesn't, then there's going to be major implications for the 2021 season on whether or not there's actually going to be a season to begin with. So there's a lot that has to be sussed out and has to play out still in that regard. To me, it sounds like nothing more than just more profits and more, you know, money for the NFL and the owners at the, you know, potential detriment to the players overall, and only gives them, you know, breadcrumbs at best. So we'll see what happens. So now let's transition into the last thing that I want to talk about. The other thing to wrap this up, just to give you the updates on the Dolphins hires. So Dolphins hire Lemuel Jean-Pierre as assistant offensive line coach. The Dolphins announced a handful of coaching moves on Thursday, including the addition of former Seahawks offensive lineman Lemuel Jean-Pierre as their assistant offensive line coach. Jean-Pierre spent the last 2 seasons with the Raiders in the same position. He broke into coaching with the Seahawks in 2017 after wrapping up his 6-year playing career in Seattle. He will assist Steve Marshall with the offensive line group. The Dolphins also announced the previously reported hirings of defensive backs coach Gerald Alexander and linebackers coach Anthony Campanile. In addition to the hires, the Dolphins announced that wide receivers coach Carl Durrell has added the title of assistant head coach. They also announced that Rob Leonard has moved from linebackers coach to assistant defensive line coach, and that Josh Grizzard has moved from offensive quality control to assistant wide receivers coach. Okay, and real quick also, because I want to give you a little bit more background on a couple of those players. This was a tweet from Josh Houts. 2 players that I really like in this year's draft. He talks about, anyway, let's get to the evaluations of the coaches, because he talks about there's a couple players that he likes in the draft that were coached by these guys. Alexander is the 11th person in franchise history to both play and coach for the Dolphins. He played 2 games at safety for Miami in the 2011 season, so not much. And from what I can tell, these previous players that are now coaches for the Dolphins, their playing record was just kind of eh. Now, does that have bearing on how they're going to be as coaches? Some. Is it declarative and definitive on whether or not they'll be a good or bad coach? No. We'll see how that plays out. But again, we went from, so, you know, last offseason, Brian Flores and this regime got so much praise for the star-studded coaching staff that ended up being overwhelmingly a failure, most notably because they're all gone. And then now they're getting praise for having a young and experienced coaching staff, a lot, you know, some of which don't even have NFL coaching experience, etc., etc. So, I mean, people just love to change the narrative to suit their own, you know, needs and desires, regardless of what the facts are. Look, am I saying that things are not going to be successful? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. My guess is that overall, with all of the data included, with the fact that the entire coaching staff is new, a lot of them are younger guys, have less experience. Some of them haven't even coached in the NFL, etc. Totally new schemes, new offensive and defensive coordinators, totally new schemes. With a very young and experienced roster that is expected to be even more young and experienced, because Rashad Jones, I expect, is going to end up going. You know, we'll see. I mean, it just, all of it points to things are going to be a disaster, but just from the coaching staff perspective, we have to wait and see what they do, right? Because that star-studded staff from last year didn't put a good product out on the field. Now, it's not entirely their fault, right? They do have some blame does go to the front office and the power structure, but Brian Flores certainly was a part of that. To his own admission, he had a hand in every transaction that was made. Anyway, you guys get it. You know what I have to say about that. So let's see. Alexander spent the past 3 seasons as the defensive backs coach at California. 2 of his defensive backs earned all Pac-12 honors in 2019. Cameron Bynum Jr. and Ashton Davis. In 2018, Alexander's unit helped the Bears lead the Pac-12 and ranked 2nd nationally with 21 interceptions. The team also led the Pac-12 and was 9th nationally in passing defense, 175.1 passing yards allowed per game. So, not bad there, right? Some good accolades, right? So he definitely is a potential, he could do good things here. But at the same time, we also had, you could say, you certainly could make the argument, an overachieving secondary for what we had talent-wise, et cetera, and we got rid of some coaches who had pretty, well-rounded and good, impressive resumes in the work that they have done in the secondary. So, I mean, and there's definitely some things to be argued that continuity in keeping those coaches to give them another year to work with the same players, et cetera, could be beneficial instead of having so much change in flux, right? So, but he does have some good things. He helped some of his players earn some impressive accolades and so on and so forth. So, there's definitely some possibilities there. We'll have to see how it meshes. But again, I like to make sure to give you as much information and data as possible so you guys can make, decisions for yourself, not just go off of what my analysis is. Campanile has coached multiple position groups on both sides of the ball at the collegiate level. In 2019, Campanile served as the linebackers coach at Michigan, where he helped Kalecki Hudson and Josh Uche both earn all Big Ten honors. Campanile spent 3 years, 16 to 18 at Boston College, where he coached defensive backs, 16 to 17, and added co-defensive coordinator duties in 18. He helped 6 of his defensive backs earn all ACC honors, and 4 of them were selected in the NFL draft. Campanile also coached tight ends from 13 to 14 and wide receivers at 15 at Rutgers. Also to, the division and the conferences that they're in, the Pac-12 and stuff, right, as opposed to, the Big Ten. A lot of those things go into it. Now, I don't know as much about college football as I would like because I don't have the time to follow it. So I'll leave you guys to make whatever implications on that you will. But again, for me, overall, I think with, the potential catastrophes that could come from the CBA, and potentially having a lockout in 2021, this whole mess with how the quarterback situation is, the shit with Tua, blah, 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 the potential that they could, and the likelihood, I believe, that they're going to trade up to get a quarterback, and how they're going to, mishandle the draft and free agency. That's my perspective, right? And numerous other factors that we've, talked about and discussed, the entirely new coaching staff, the roster that's expected to be extremely young and inexperienced again next year, new schemes, et cetera, all of that together, to me, spells out disaster. Now, year 1, even though the vast majority of people are spinning it like it was some wild, miraculous, wonderful thing and successful season 1 under this regime was a complete disaster. It didn't need to happen to begin with, and I think and project season 2 to be pretty bad as well. And then, of course, you guys know my ultimate prediction is that after another couple down seasons and seasons that fall far short of the expectations, people out there are like, oh, we're going to be Super Bowl contenders in 2020. Okay, dude. Okay. I don't know where you get the evidence for that, but okay. Right? So, when expectations are fallen very short, especially too with, anyway, expanded playoffs. That Brian Flores is going to end up getting scapegoated in a couple years, and we're going to hit the reset button again. Again, they can prove me wrong, and God, I hope that they do. But the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that that is not going to happen. I hope that they prove me wrong. I want them to prove me wrong. I want this team to rise back to prominence and have sustained success, etc., etc. I just don't believe that they are going in the right direction for that. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. And so with that, I'm going to get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Phins up.